which is this, that over the last few years, as a country, we have walked away from the Africa agenda. That's a reality. Over the years, the focus on the continent and the placement of South Africa within that context has diminished. I know this also because when I go around the African continent, other Africans raise this question. What has happened to South Africa? Why are you walking away from the rest of us? That's part of our reality. So the question that Umulemu is raising, what does South Africa do in terms of responding to this world order that is emerging? In a sense, it's an unfair question. Because, as I've said, as a country, we've been walking away even from focus on these Africa questions. Never mind the rest of the world. I think the students also at this university of this African school would also have noticed another phenomenon, which is that the spirit of Pan-Africanism on the continent has also been retreating. You see it everywhere. Not only in South Africa, but elsewhere in the world, elsewhere on our continent. That spirit of Pan-Africanism is also diminishing. And in a sense, one can understand it. Each one of our countries individually gets preoccupied with its own domestic challenges. What happens to the rest of the continent, what happens to this Pan-African perspective, recedes. So, Omulemu, you are quite correct. There's something that is happening in the rest of the world which signifies a changing world order. At the beginning of this year, the Secretary of State, United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, gave an interview, an interesting interview, in which he said there was a particular period when you had a unipolar world in which United States was a dominant pole, a unipolar world. And he said that period was an aberration. When I read that thing, I stood up and gave Marco Rubio a standing ovation. That you'd get a leader of the United States to say, the unipolar world is, let's not go back there. A world dominated by the United States. And then he went on to say, what is normal is the practice of multipolarity. Again, I gave another standing ovation. That the United States would take a position of that kind. And then he said, in the context of that multipolarity, each of the countries of the world pursues its own interests, does whatever in the rest of the world in pursuit of its own interests. And he said, I remember he mentioned Chile. He said Chile pursues its own interests, as does China, as does Russia. And he said, within that multipolar world, therefore, the United States will pursue its own interests. That's when I sat down. I didn't give that a standing ovation. Because it was signaling something about what was going to happen. Since everybody in the world pursues their own interests, why should the United States not pursue its own interests? I thought what was missing in what actually had been a correct position taken by Secretary of State Rubio was to say, we pursue, each one of those countries pursues our own interest within the context of a particular global setting. That all of us, for instance, are bound by what is in the UN Charter. Yes, indeed, we might very well pursue that our own interests as countries, but there's a global context that was missing. It explains the way that the United States has acted. Consistent with that position, therefore, we will, like all other countries, pursue our own interests. That is why then you've had this demand, very visible, very loud, very correct, insisting on these three things: multipolarity, multilateralism, and respect for the UN Charter. You've had this demand made. This is part of this formation of this world order. That yes, indeed, as each one of our countries must pursue these interests, at least let's be guided by these three things: respect for multipolarity, multilateralism, particularly exercised through the United Nations, and respect for the UN Charter when we talk about international law. There's clearly a battle that is going on in the world around these issues. That's why even the mention about this celebration in China, now last week, of the defeat of the Japanese aggression during the Second World War, it's the 80th anniversary, and what happened in Beijing to celebrate that. Again, people watch the pictures. Did you see that picture with Xi Jinping and Putin and Kim Jong-un? It's part of this discussion. It signifies something. Or a bit earlier, when the Shanghai Cooperation Organization met, again they would say, did you see that picture? Xi Jinping, Putin, and the Prime Minister of India. The situation, I would say, with regard to Africa, South Africa, the AU, with regard to what interventions do we make in order to make sure that that emerging global international order addresses the African interests. I can tell you what I think we should do. But I think looking at the objective reality in this country, on our continent, I think we are at our weakest in terms of making this kind of intervention. The sense of cohesion that you need, for instance, on the African continent to say, if you said, let the Africans come together and say to them, in this discussion about multilateralism, where do we stand? I think you would find countries moving in different directions. I've told this story before, maybe even here. That some years back I visited one of the African countries. I was still president then. And then when I was leaving, I was accompanied in the car by one of the ministers. So we're chatting away there in the car and so on. And then he gave me his business card and said, President, next time you come to visit us, I would like you to contact me so that we can continue this very interesting discussion we're having among ourselves, between the two of us. So this is my business card with my contact details. So I took the card, put it in my pocket, and off we went. And as we were flying, I took the card out and looked at it. On one side, it had his name, minister, and contact details, telephone number, and all of that. And I looked the other side of the card. It had the same details. Name, minister, contact details in Paris. On this side of the card are the contact details in his own home in Africa. On the other side are his contact details in Paris. So, and the man was not ashamed to give me a card like that. But I'm trying to say that sense of cohesion among our continent, which would enable us to intervene in the making of this new world order, I think it's not there. And I think an unfortunate part of that is, as I was saying earlier, as a country, we've walked away from the Africa agenda ourselves. So the capacity to intervene with the rest of the continent to answer the question that Omulemu we are raising, capacity isn't there from here. To say, let us get together as Africans and play the role that we need to play in this emerging new world order. What is to be done about that? I'm saying I can tell you what I think. But I think objectively it might be entirely irrelevant. Because I think we need to do something else first. To reinstitute, for instance, the Africa agenda here in South Africa. To re-engage the African continent about itself. Before we begin to answer the question, what do we do about the rest of the world? And those I think should be our starting points. The question that, Rachel, you are raising about the Congo is related to the same issue. You know, the conflict in the Congo, we're talking now particularly about the Eastern Congo, that conflict has been going on now for a number of years. Very difficult to resolve this issue. You are right, I saw that recently there's been some controversy because the Thabo Mbeki Foundation held we now have an annual session on this question of peace and security on the continent. It was the second session now, last week, focused on the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, the Congo, and Southern Africa, particularly focusing on Mozambique. I'm saying that I've seen questions being raised about the presence of a delegation from the M23 in the Congo. It puzzled me that question arose at all. Because you can't discuss peace and security in the Congo without involving the M23. Otherwise, you are joking. That is why you have a process taking place in Doha, in Qatar, where the government of the Congo and the M23 are meeting. Necessarily, it's correct. And before that, the president of Angola, the current chairperson of the African Union, had chaired a process, exactly the same process, of a dialogue between the government of the Congo and the M23 in order to find peace in the Congo. I think the Thabo Mbeki Foundation had been very, very foolish if it had invited all these Congolese to say, let's talk about peace and security in the Congo, but you M23 stay away. It doesn't make sense. It would never make sense. Because even to understand the phenomenon of the M23, where does this thing come from? It's very, very fundamental to understand that, because that helps you to understand the Congo. If you don't understand the origins of the M23 and what it stands for, then you will not understand the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I'm saying that as a foundation, we thought that let us discuss the matter of the DRC, because clearly this is one of the major areas in terms of peace and security on the continent. And let everybody come. The consequence of which, not only did they have the M23 there, you had representatives of the governing party. President Tshisekedi's party representatives were there. And quite correctly, they never questioned the presence of the M23. They are Congolese. They all know the nature of the challenge in the Congo. So I'm saying President Tshisekedi's party, the UDPS, had its representatives there, and they addressed the meeting, made their own proposals as to what is to be done. The M23, the Alliance of the Congo River, the AFC, were also there. They addressed the meeting and said, this is what we think about the Congo. And I think I can say this, that in the end, we had a meeting with all of these delegations. And the very, very interesting thing was this. There was a unanimous view, from the governing party to the M23 and others in between. All of them saying, it's very clear to us as the Congolese that we need a national dialogue. We need to get together as the Congolese and say, what do we do about the Congo? That is a unanimous view. That includes the M23. I'm saying it includes the governing party of the Congo of President Tshisekedi. And hopefully that will happen. That the Congolese will again get, they call it the Sun City number 2. They say, President, we met here at Sun City to talk about the future of the Congo and agreed, all of us. And as a consequence of which we took the agreement at Sun City and drafted a constitution on which all of us agreed. The problem, they say, is that in the implementation of the Sun City agreement, we didn't implement various elements of that agreement. That's why we have a crisis today. We need another Sun City number 2 so that we as Congolese can then talk together and say, what do we do about our country? I'm saying, Rachel, you could never talk about peace and security in the Congo and exclude the M23. If you did that, it would mean you have not understood the nature of the challenge of peace and security in the Congo. We were doing nothing else different from what President of Angola did and what the Rwandans, the Qataris are doing in terms of putting together a grouping of this kind. The matter of peace and security on the continent, more broadly, I think is very related to the issue I was talking about earlier, of this retreat of the Pan-African spirit on the continent. I think this broader question about peace and security on the continent relates to that. You know what happens normally? A conflict breaks out somewhere, then we intervene and say, stop the guns, silence the guns. These guns are then silenced. The belligerents then talk to each other, produce a new constitution, hold elections. We have an interim government, hold elections on the basis of the new constitution, and that's peace. So it normally happens. And what's missing in that process is an intervention to address the root causes of the conflict. So it's necessary to silence the guns. And so it's necessary to find a formula so that people can govern their country. But of critical importance is this question: what is it that led to this conflict? We have to address that so that it does not arise again. And indeed, this was one of the hot issues as we're discussing now, peace and security with regard to Mozambique. What is happening in Cabo Delgado? Who are these people? What do they stand for? Whom do they represent? What do they want? Because you need to understand that not only to say silence the guns, but in order to address the issue which gave birth to that grouping so that it does not arise again. I'm saying the challenge about that is the politics of the continent. It becomes difficult to get to this matter of the root causes in the absence of a Pan-African outlook. You can't do it in the absence of that Pan-African outlook. If, for instance, at the root of the conflict might be, for instance, issues of ethnic power. To say this particular grouping is too dominant, and therefore there's maldistribution of resources and all that. And therefore, to get to the root causes, we must look at this matter. For instance, it's called unity in diversity. How do we address this unity in diversity? Address both issues at the same time. It's a very political question. It's not mechanical. And I'm saying that it needs a political base from which you are able to arrive at a situation like that. If you don't have it, you will avoid addressing these fundamental questions. And I'm saying that on the continent, this is part of our problem, that weakness of a Pan-African perspective, it impacts negatively on the capacity of the continent to deal with these problems of peace and security. So that's one of the matters that we need to address. And indeed, I think that the more the continent would succeed in kind of developing this cohesion within itself and about its own future, the easier it would be to address the matter about the brain drain. Many years ago, I visited the United States. Our then ambassador says to me, President, there's a group of Africans here who want to see you. So I saw them. This is a group of Africans. It was a very interesting group. All of them had PhDs. All of them. And all of them had got those PhDs in what the Americans call the Ivy League universities. And all of them were under 40. And this was executive of that organization that organized themselves across the United States as Africans, all of them PhDs, all of them from these universities. And this is the executive committee that I met in Washington. So they say to me, President, this is who we are. This is this body. So I protested. Professor Chancellor to them immediately. Because I said, you see, the way you people have constituted yourselves, it means I can't belong. I was excluded. But these Africans were saying, the President, we're qualified as we are, we're working in the US, but we remain African. Let's look for a mechanism whereby we'll spend some of our time here in the US and spend time in Africa so that our capacities make an impact on the development of our continent. We agreed on the matter with them, and actually NEPAD then ran a program because they've got qualifications in all sorts of things, mathematics and this and that and the other, to talk around the continent to say, during the 3 months of the year, we can bring so-and-so to come and work in this sector. Matter was agreed, it became program of NEPAD. It's disappeared. Again, for the same reason I was indicating earlier, the capacity on the continent has weakened. I'm absolutely certain that up to today, there's that willingness among these Africans who are in the diaspora like that, these ones who are represented as being part of the brain drain. I'm absolutely certain that if the continent reached out to them to say, look, you can see where the continent is moving this way, they would repeat the same thing. We may not return from the United States, but we're ready to spend months on our continent to give necessary contribution. It's possible to deal with the matter of the brain drain, but the challenge starts here. It does not start in America, it starts here. To get the continent right so that we can then do the right thing. And I think that you are quite correct, Sipati, about the existence of many policies on the African continent with regard to the youth. There's no shortage of policies, even at the continental level, on the issue of youth challenge and youth development. Again, you'll come back to this problem. The right policy positions have been taken, they exist. The will to implement is not there. With regard to a whole range of issues on the African continent, it's the absence of the will to do the right things, which have been agreed already. Issues of youth development, for instance. So I would really be very, very happy, Professor Msila, if your school can then say we are answering the questions that arise from all of this. What then do we do? Me having said this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, we can't stop there. What we have to say, what is it then that we do in order to get things right? And this African school, that is its task. And I really hope that we would focus on the matter like that. Because just to end on this point, I'm told that even some members of the diplomatic corps here in the last few weeks have met informally and raised the same question. To say, why doesn't this school serve as a center in terms of other African academic institutions to answer these questions? Why don't we do that? I think it's a challenge that faces all of us. And so there's none of us, I can see here, a number of our former ambassadors, Kingsley Makubela is sitting here, and others I've mentioned, another one with gray hair. Even highly educated here like Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. A lot of capacity there is to answer these questions. Because I'm saying we should not only say this is what is wrong, we must also say what is to be done. And the school must do that. I think I've answered all of these questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just before we continue with the questions, I would like to relay the message from the panelists who said to me that I should relay the message that they are so thankful to be part of this panel today, and I should give their thanks to the VC and His Excellency, the President, our Dean, Professor Paswana, as well as the Council. So thank you on behalf of the panelists. Mr. President, also thank you for the homework that you have given us as a school, that we need to look at some of the questions that you raised. I think we'll take that as a challenge as a school. I'm sure our team is ready to take up the challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, now the session that we're getting into will be to ask you as the audience some questions. And for the first round, I'll take only 6 questions. 2 from this side, 2 from this side, and 2 from that end. Please, when you ask a question, don't start by giving a speech. Just get on to the question immediately. Because sometimes you'll find that we get carried away by wanting to talk about 15 minutes before asking the question. Okay, just be direct and ask the question. We'll have the first one here. We'll have another one there, the cap. We'll have one there. Green jersey. We have the one there. We have one there. In that order. Oh, we'll come back. We'll come back.
Okay. No, thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mtutuzi Michael Majola, and I would like to pose a question to the former state president. It has to do with the national dialogue. We've noted that his foundation, along with other 6 legacy organizations, withdrew from the national dialogues preparatory, citing concerns over rushed timelines and reduce citizens' role, feeling the process meaning the government wants to take influence in that process. What are your views on the national dialogue's current trajectory, and how do we believe it can be made more inclusive and effective in addressing South Africa's challenges? And the other question, quick one, President, is going to speak about Donald Trump, the US president. How do you assess Donald Trump's comments and policies regarding the white farmers, including the proposed tariff that is going to be imposed with South Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. That is the first question. Panelists, can you are released. Thanks. Okay, that is the first question. The second question? It was somewhere. Oh, okay. Panelists?
Thank you, Program Director. Also a question to former President Mbeki. To say when you were president, and maybe even now, because I'm sure you interact with your counterparts, was there a program to align the continent politically, legally? Because for us to become a seamless continent like Europe, we have to align politically. Some of our laws must be aligned. Has there been a homework to look at that? Or is it some of the masters and PhDs that will come out of the school? To align education systems, to align infrastructure planning, town planning, all of these things, because up until we get to those granular activities, everything else becomes very high level and textbook. Thanks.
Thank you. The third question, where is the, there? In that order, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Thabiso Mthembu. Mr. President, my question relates to the United States of America. In terms of the United States of America deploying its military to the Caribbean Sea, how do you assess that threat to Venezuela? What do you make of it? And secondly, in terms of the United States, or rather, let me say, the recent attack of Israel to Qatar, do you really believe that the United States was unaware of the attack before it actually took place? Thank you.
Thank you. The next one. In that order. We can hear.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Togolo Janki. Mr. President, my question relates to the relationship that South Africa has with Iran. And the reason why I asked this question is because in 2015, a series of documents were leaked to the news media. They came to be known as the spy cables. There was one document in particular in those documents called Operational Target Analysis, and in that document it went into the details of the relationship that South Africa has with Iran with regards to its nuclear program and how South Africa could help or has been helping them with that regard. And in the executive order that the United States issued against South Africa, it also mentioned this relationship with Iran, and also recently an SANDF general went to Iran in secret and it became a thing in the media. My question then becomes, what is the nature of this relationship that we have with Iran, and then what does it have to do with the contention and issues that we've been having with the United States?
Thank you. The next one here.
Afternoon, everyone, and afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Promise. So I want to go back to the question of the Congo. It's very important to me and to everyone here. I just came back from the Congo. I just came back from the Kivu. I've been in the Kivu for many years, 4 years of my life. I served in the Kivu. I've served in Sudan, fought against the Janjaweed, M23, ADF, you can name it. So now, on the question of M23, and then inviting them here, I nearly cried. I just want to state that. It was so painful, but it was relevant, as you said. Now, I want us to go back on the question of Rwandan refugee. The question here that we need to go deep into is the Rwandan refugees and the Ugandan refugees who ran away from the two dictators, who is Museveni and Kagame, who ran into Congo. That's where the root cause is. But now, always when we address this question, we are talking about M23. Remember the Rwandan refugee, or the question of M23 started because President of Rwanda was killed. Now, the Rwandan refugees ran to Congo. After they ran to Congo, and now they want to go back to Rwanda. Now, Mr. President, I want to ask you, if you call M23 and you call the Chilombo government and you call the government of Rwanda to come and discuss, and you call Nanga for the Congo River Alliance to come to the foundation and discuss, why are you leaving the ADF, who are the refugees of Uganda, who ran away from Museveni and who are causing trouble in the Congo, in the area of Beni and Uvira province? Now, why are you leaving the FDLR, who are Rwandan refugees? Why are you leaving them in the dialogue? Because here the problem is Rwanda is coming into Congo they say they want to fight the FDLR. Why are they being left out? Who is listening to the Hutu tribe? Nobody's listening to the Hutu.
Yes, that's a very clear question. Let's get the last one for this round.
Sanbonani Dumela. To our President and the panelists and every dignitary who is here, I'd like to greet you all. Umuzi wakadlamini lokhulumayo. And I would like to pose a question to our former President. On a lighter note, Mr. President, can you please be part of our board? We definitely, as the youth of South Africa, need the wisdom that you carry. And as our elder, we would benefit highly, even if it's just one of you duplicated into 1 million serving in our boards, we would definitely exceed our expectations. Now, to my question, is to the University of South Africa and to our former president. This is regarding people living with disability. Studies have shown that it's 1/5 of the world's population lives with some disability. And what is, if that's the case, what is the university therefore implementing to aid this, to aid them financially, to aid them in their livelihoods, as some are trapped in the townships, in the rural areas, and where they are destitute and we cannot reach them? So how are we as a people dealing with the very least of us in their challenges and their endeavors? Foremost in the financial services sector as one of the most prominent in the country.
Thank you. That is our first round, and it was very male-centric. We'll see the second round. Yes, with the last one. Okay.
Professor Msila says there's a second round coming, which means that I must be short in my answers, otherwise there won't be time. Muzi, with regard to your request about the board, agreed. They contact me. I'm happy to serve on the board. On the matter of how the university is treating with the issue of the important issue of people with disability, fortunately, Vice Chancellor is sitting next to me there. She must answer that question. It's an important question, I agree. It needs her to answer it. When we were in government, we thought this was one of the matters which needed really close attention. We had resisted the idea of the formation of a ministry dealing with women, youth, people with disability. And the reason we're resisting the idea of a ministry, we're saying that those issues belong to the President of the Republic, not particular ministers. So right at the top, because it's a cross-cutting issue, it must impact on every element of government. So you can't allocate it to a ministry. That's the position we took. And as a result, the government had, I don't know what the situation is now, government had a very comprehensive policy on how to deal with the disability issue. So that indeed, even I remember that the World Bank poached one of our senior officials to deal with the disability issue in Washington. So I'm sure there was a setting within which our universities could deal with the matter of disability. What UNISA is doing particularly about this matter, I really don't know. But the Vice Chancellor, fortunately, is here. She can answer that question. With regard to the Congo, as I was indicating, we brought the Congolese together to say, let's talk about the future of the Congo. And indeed they came, and they, as I say, in all the elements that came, and we discussed that, and they came to a unanimous view as to what they thought needed to be done. The issue that is being raised, like for instance about the people who committed genocide in Rwanda in 1994, and then went into the Eastern Congo, who now became what is called the FDLR. The question that is being raised is important. What are we doing about those people? In 2001, 2002, after we had concluded the negotiations among the Congolese had concluded the negotiations among themselves in what was called Sun City, it was clear to us that there was another element that needed to be addressed, which was the question of the relations particularly between Rwanda and the DRC. As a consequence of which, we convened a process between the two governments to look at the matter of the relations between the two of them, which would include this matter of the people who had fled from Rwanda into the Eastern Congo. As a consequence of which, there was an agreement signed between the DRC and Rwanda, signed by both presidents, Joseph Kabila and Paul Kagame. I recall that even Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the UN, insisted that he wanted to be one of the observers to that agreement. So that agreement is signed by President Kagame, President Joseph Kabila. Witnesses, Kofi Annan, myself. And part of that, so the Americans are saying that the agreement that was signed now in Washington between the two countries by the foreign ministers of the two countries is the first such agreement. That's not correct. First agreement was signed here in Pretoria, 2002, signed by the presidents. One of the clauses in that agreement, I'm sure it appears again in this agreement in the United States, was that it would be important for the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to disarm the FDLR. If they want to stay in the Congo, to disarm them, they can stay as refugees. Otherwise, to resist, to assist in the process of their return to Rwanda as ordinary civilians, not armed groups. Attached to that was then the withdrawal of the Rwandan troops that were in the Congo because of the presence of the FDLR. I'm sure if you look at the agreement that was signed in Washington now, it will say the same thing. That agreement didn't work, collapsed. The reason it collapsed is because the government of the Congo did not have the capacity to disarm the FDLR. They could not implement the agreement. So I'm saying that agreement collapsed. I don't know how the situation has changed now, because I'm quite sure the agreement in the United States will have the same provision. It's the responsibility of the government of the Congo not to allow foreigners to form armies on the territory of the Congo. And therefore, this FDLR must be disarmed, and indeed can go back home to Rwanda, but the government of Rwanda must make sure it accepts these Rwandan citizens. Whether that will actually happen at now, I don't know. So that is how we're dealing with the matter of the FDLR. We couldn't insert them into a meeting where the Congolese are meeting, deciding the future of the Congo among themselves. They're not Congolese. These are Rwandans. And so I'm saying we're dealing with them in a different way, within the context of a bilateral agreement between the governments of the Congo and Rwanda. And fortunately, you've had a new agreement between the governments of Rwanda and the Congo. It has a provision for how to deal with the FDLR. So the matter is not being ignored, but it's being dealt with in that particular context. Whether the government of the Congo would have the capacity to disarm the FDLR now, as was written in that agreement between President Joseph Kabila and President Kagame, whether they have that capacity now, I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, I don't know. But I think that's the only way to deal with the problem of the FDLR. It must be on the basis of a condition of a peace agreement between the two countries. And then the two countries must act together to make sure that there's no security threat to Rwanda based on an armed group that is in the Congo, and vice versa. There must be no threat to the security of the DRC on the basis of some armed group that might be in Rwanda. I think that's the only way to deal with this issue. And fortunately, and hopefully, the agreement that's been signed in the US now would attend to that matter, hopefully, of the FDLR, the Rwandan refugees in the Congo. I'm talking about the Rwandan refugees because we've really never engaged the issue of Ugandan refugees in the Congo, because the problematic group was this FDLR. We've had a very our relationship, I'm now talking as a liberation movement, our relationship with Iran starts after the overthrow of the Shah of Iran. The government of Iran at the time of the Shah had very good relations with the apartheid regime. When it was overthrown, that's when we started our own relations with Iran, which have continued ever since. At the time that the issue of the nuclear question as it relates to Iran, at that time that it arose very sharp and became a big issue, Security Council and all that, for some of that time, South Africa was the chair of the non-aligned movement. So we dealt with the government of Iran as the chair of the non-aligned movement. Because the positions that the non-aligned movement were taking was this, that the non-aligned movement is a very active supporter of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And therefore, the non-aligned movement would be opposed to any proliferation of nuclear weapons if it occurred in Iran. That's the position we took. And so we had very active engagement with the government of Iran on this matter. And the government of Iran continues to insist with us that there was actual policy that Iran must not have nuclear weapons. And therefore the accusation that was being made at the time, they consistently denied it, that there were no nuclear weapons in Iran. As I say, we worked with them very closely at the time. I remember that there was a leading Iranian who became president of Iran, Mr. Rouhani. At the time that he was leading the negotiations on this issue, he came to us. We had a number of meetings with him. I'm saying later he became the president of Iran. During that time, maybe this is the first time I'm saying this, during this time, we are chair of the non-aligned movement. I then talked to the British Prime Minister and said, you know, Prime Minister, we are regularly in contact with the Iranians on this matter, and they assured us that there are no nuclear weapons. Can you give me one or two facts which show that in fact there is work